Okay, Yancy, may I start?
Yes, I'm recording. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm now going to call the special meeting of the governing body and planning board to order. It's 7:37 p.m. Can we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Yancy.
Okay, thank you. Yancy, can you please read the statement regarding the Open Public Meetings Act?
Okay, it's a long one. This meeting is called pursuant to the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Law. Notice of this meeting was included in a notice sent to the Record newspaper on May 2nd, 2025, posted on the bulletin board in the municipal building, and has remained continuously posted as the required notices under the statute. A copy of this notice is and has been available to the public and is on file in the office of the municipal clerk. In accordance with the New Jersey law regulating the holding of public meetings, specifically the Open Public Meetings Act, notification is hereby given that the Englewood City Council and Planning Board will hold a special joint meeting on Thursday, May 8th, 2025 at 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss the fourth round of affordable housing with the city's experts. The governing body and Planning Board may also go into closed session to discuss items permitted under the Open Public Meetings Act, specifically contract negotiations, litigation matters, and matters within the attorney-client privilege. Members of the public who wish to participate in this meeting may do so by calling or clicking on the link below at 7:30 p.m. Please see the link on our website or by dialing 646-558-8656. The meeting ID for this meeting is 913-3709-3602, and the passcode is 925328. Individuals calling into this number will be able to fully participate in the meeting, including providing public comment. Public comments may be submitted by 3 p.m. on the date of the meeting, either through written letter or email to meeting@cityofenglewood.org. All written comments shall be read during the public forum portion of the meeting and shall be subject to the same time limitations for public speaking. Duplicative comments shall be noted for the record and summarized. The agenda for the meeting can be found on the city's website at www.cityofenglewood.org. A separate meeting will be used for the closed session if needed. The City Council and Planning Board reserve the right to discuss and act upon such public business as may be brought up for consideration, to the extent that consideration of such public business is not known at this time. Formal action may or may not be taken. Proper notice having been given, the municipal clerk is directed to include the statement in the minutes of this meeting.
Thank you. Yancy, can I please have the roll call?
Want me just to do the ones for the council and then Paris do the ones for the planning board?
Sounds good.
Okay. Councilwoman David?
Present.
Councilman Rosenzweig?
Here,
Councilman Tokayer?
Here.
Councilman Wilson?
Present.
Council President Wasatski?
Here.
Paris, do you want to do the planning board?
Sure. Chairman David? Chairman David?
Here.
Vice Chairman Lerman?
Here.
Ms. Patino Belay is absent. Ms. Cordone?
Here.
Mr. Rosenblatt?
Here.
Mr. George? Mr. Horowitz is away. Ms. Thomas?
Here.
Ms. Mann?
Here.
Mayor Wiles?
Here.
Councilman Wilson?
Present.
Thank you.
Also present is City Manager Robert S. Hoffman, City Attorney Bill Bailey, Planning Board Attorney Douglas Byrne, Co-Attorney Ed Buzak, City Planner John Zabo, myself, and Land Use Secretary Paris Myers.
Okay, thank you. Before the meeting started, I think everybody received via email the timeline of the fourth round of affordable housing. Paris sent it to the planning board and Yancy sent it to the council. So I wanted everyone to see that in advance so that we didn't have to spend too much time on that, and instead we could dedicate tonight's discussion to the actual plan itself. And to lead the discussion, I just wanted to ask Ed Buzak, it's going to be led by Ed Buzak, who is our affordable housing attorney, and by John Zabo, who is our planner. So Ed, Mr. Buzak, I give you the.
That is fine. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. As Yancy said, I'm special affordable housing counsel for the city and have been for over a decade. My involvement tonight is to just give a little context so that when John Zabo, our planner, puts forth his report, you can put it in the right boxes, so to speak, and understand why we're doing what we're doing and why John is doing what he's doing. I will be brief. In 2024, Governor Murphy signed an amended Fair Housing Act, which substantially revamped the manner in which affordable housing obligations are determined, how those obligations are assigned, and how municipalities respond to those obligations. The first step was to have the Department of Community Affairs make a determination of essentially two things. One was the number of affordable housing units that municipalities need to create a realistic opportunity to have constructed over the next round, which is round four. Round four runs from 2025, July 1, 2025, through July 1 or June 30th, 2035. So everything we're talking about today is intended to satisfy the city's affordable housing obligation over that 10-year period. The manner in which the number of affordable units is determined is set forth in the legislation, and it's a relatively objective methodology. What the legislature said and what DCA did was to take the number of households that were created in the state of New Jersey in 2010 and 2020, take the difference between those two numbers, multiply that by 40%, on the basis that 40% of the new households that were created during that period are in the category of low and moderate income households. And just for more context, a moderate income household makes between 50 and 80% of the region's median income, and a low income household makes under 50% of the median income of the region. The legislation created 6 regions in the state of New Jersey. Those 6 regions are by county. They're from 2 to 4 counties in a region. Englewood is part of Region 1. Region 1 consists of Hudson County, Bergen County, Passaic County, and Sussex County. And it's got urban counties, suburban counties, and somewhat rural counties. And that's generally the way the 6 regions were established, using the 21 counties in the state. The number of statewide affordable housing units that needs to be created based upon the DCA calculation that I just gave you is 84,698 housing units for low and moderate income households. The legislation establishes the manner in which those 84,698 households are to be allocated, first to the regions and then the municipalities within the region. So it just keeps breaking down. In our region, that is Region 1, there's approximately 25,000 affordable housing units that need to be created over that 10-year period, with the approximate, I think it's about 104 or 120 municipalities comprising those 4 counties in Region 1. In Englewood's case, the allocation that was made was 381 affordable housing units. So over the 10-year period, Englewood, under the DCA calculation and under the legislation, is supposedly to create the opportunity for 381 new affordable housing units to be constructed, half of them for low-income households, half of them for moderate-income households. The way the legislation was set up, the DCA number, that 381, is it's not a binding number. Municipality can look at how DCA came up with that number and had the ability to challenge that number if they felt that DCA erred in any way in applying the formula. In Englewood's case, and in fact, in the case of 159 municipalities in the state of New Jersey, determinations were made that DCA committed errors in the allocation, not in the 84,698 statewide, and not in the 25,000 or so units that were assigned to Region 1, but instead to the 381, in our case, units that were assigned to Englewood. I won't get into the weeds on how that was done, but Englewood's planner, John Szabo, who you'll hear from tonight, did the analysis that DCA was supposed to do, determined that DCA committed errors, particularly as it related to the amount of land that was developable in the city. And the city challenged the DCA number. They did that by adopting what's known as a binding resolution in January of 2025. The city determined through John Szabo's efforts that DCA was off by 50 units, that the number should have been 331, not 381. That is what was put in the binding resolution. Between February 1 and February 28th, any interested party, which is essentially anyone in the state, could challenge the city's determination, that 331, arguing that instead it should be the DCA number, 381, or some other number in between those numbers, or even more than 381. Indeed, in Englewood's case, as with the other 158 municipalities that adopted binding resolutions changing the DCA number, all to a lower number, the challenge was made by the New Jersey Builders Association, who objected to every single municipality that sought to adjust its number from the DCA number. The new legislation that I refer to sets up a process as to how that is resolved. Again, I won't get into the real details of that, but it involves a panel of 7 judges, of retired judges, who sit independently. Cases are assigned to them, that is, these objections, and the judge is required to hold a settlement session and then hold an actual session on the basis for the municipality's calculation and the basis for the objection, and then make a determination ultimately as to what it should be. During the course of the settlement aspect of this, after much effort, the city did settle, as opposed to taking a risk that the number would be 381. They settled at 359, which is just about a split between what DCA said the number should be and what the city said the number should be. So the number that we have to satisfy, and what John's plan that he's going to talk to you about has to satisfy, at least on paper, is 381 units. The next step is just that. How does the city satisfy those, 331 units? The next phase is, how does the city actually do that? And those of you who were involved in the previous round will recall that the city contended successfully that it had insufficient land to satisfy the obligation that was part of that was in round 3. And because there was no new vacant land created in the city, as in most municipalities, the city took the same position, that we have insufficient vacant land to satisfy the 331 units. That's done through a process called a vacant land analysis and a vacant land adjustment. John Szabo did that. He'll talk about that tonight in a couple of minutes. And it is, at the end of the day, it is that number that the city has to satisfy through modifications in its zoning. The act created one other phase, one other obligation to a municipality that contended it did not have adequate vacant land to satisfy the obligation that DCA had determined, or that the municipality had determined after going through this process that I referred to earlier. And that obligation is to look at lands in the city and in the municipality that are likely to redevelop. So it's land that's already developed, but is likely to redevelop, and provide realistic zoning to address 25% of its prospective need obligation, 331, as that number has been adjusted. The language in the law is very ambiguous. We have taken the position, and the city has thus far endorsed this position, and John's plan takes this into account, that calculation is 25% not of the 331 units that, 359 units that the city settled on, but instead it's of this new number that John's going to talk about, which is a much smaller number. That has to be accommodated in some way as well, and John will talk about that. We have, and this gets to the timeline and why we're here tonight, we have until June 30th to establish the program through what's known as the Housing Element and Fair Share Plan, which many of you are familiar with because we did it in round 3 not too long ago. We need to adopt that plan by June 30th and file it by June 30th of 2025. So John's been working on that even before we established what our number was going to be, the 359 that we settled on. And that process is the same as any process of adopting a master plan or adopting an amendment to the master plan, which the planning board has went through last year with regard to the 2024, I believe it was, master plan. So there's notice, there's a public hearing, and then the planning board takes action. There's only one other step left with that, and that is that the governing body has to endorse that Housing Element and Fair Share Plan. And it is for that reason, among others, that there was a committee created with the council president, members of the council, and members of the planning board, including the mayor, who would work on this and discuss it so that everybody was, at the end of the day, on the same page, that everybody knew what was going on. And when this plan ultimately is concluded or completed and put before the planning board for the public hearing, that it will not be a surprise to the planning board. We held a week or two ago a public session that some of you were in attendance at to solicit information from the public. We're here tonight as a joint meeting with the public where John is going to again explain further where he is. He's gotten further down the line since the public forum, and be able to then create or have a dialogue with the council and the planning board members, the professionals, and then ultimately also with the public. So with that, Council President, I'm going to pass it back. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think we're going to do that at the end if someone has questions so that we can get to really John's report and the public. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Yes, thank you, and good evening, everyone. And thank you, Ed, for the introduction and the overview, because it really streamlines this whole meeting tonight, because I'm not going to repeat and be redundant with what Ed just proclaimed before you. Working with there was a subcommittee created to work with me to determine, well, how best can we comply with the obligations that the city has agreed to in the settlement of 359 units. That subcommittee consists of Mayor Michael Wiles, Council President Lisa Wistowski, Councilman Kevin Wilson, Planning Board Chairman Anthony David, and Planning Board Member Mercedes Cordon. And what we did is we met in March and April to try to determine how can we meet this obligation of 359 units. Now, a couple things go into that. One, we have to determine what is the city's capacity to absorb or to build 359 units. And not surprisingly, as Mr. Buzak has said, we conducted what's called a vacant land analysis. And what that entails is basically looking at the city, looking at what may develop, what's vacant and available. And to nobody's surprise, there is no land. I mean, the city is fully developed community, and there's really no ability there's no exposure to large scale developments because you have no land. So we sat and we decided, well, how can we best do this and achieve a number of strategic goals? And there were two components to what we were looking at. The first component was adjusting certain overlay areas to remove places that were very intrusive into single family areas that, in fact, were problematic during the third round. So we looked at those, and there are 4 areas that we've identified that I will show you physically on the screen that we determined we could take out. Now, because that was part of the third round and part of a settlement that was approved by the court, settlement with Fair Share Housing Center and the court, we need to demonstrate that we can replace those overlays basically in comparable ways. So we looked at what overlays can we reintroduce to compensate for the overlays that we wanted to remove. And that took a lot of effort. We looked at a lot of the areas of the city, and there was an overriding desire to use this as a mechanism to kind of revitalize some of the neighborhoods that we were looking at. So we wanted to focus on how can we best utilize this affordable housing mandate and try to spur some new development that could just kind of breathe new life into some of these neighborhoods and benefit the city in terms of new development per se. And we were sensitive to the comments that we had gotten in the third round, and we were all aware of the issues going into the fourth. We focused on 3 areas. The west side of West Street between Tomlin Place and Demhurst Avenue, the northwest side of West Englewood Avenue, specifically from 215 Englewood Avenue to College Place, and west side of Grand Avenue between Van Nostrand Avenue and Honeck Street. And these were opportunities because we viewed these neighborhoods as needing to be revitalized in some way based on their current conditions. And we saw vacant boarded up buildings, a lot of pavement, no greenery, nothing that was kind of enhancing the neighborhoods that these locations were placed in. So we focused on trying to make this a positive thing. Now, what I want to reiterate, and this was all presented at the forum on April 28th, that because we have no RDP, which is, again, jargon, realistic development potential, that arises from the fact that based on our vacant land assessment, there is no development that we would be charged with as realistic. Everything moves into a category known as unmet need. And we treat unmet need differently than realistic development potential. And by that, I mean, there's a lot more flexibility. We kind of look at it as aspirational. It can happen, it might not happen, but what the obligation is of the city is to create the opportunity. The whole premise of Mount Laurel was that you cannot use zoning to zone out certain house types that would then preclude certain people from moving into your community, and that every city, every town, every community has an obligation, an affirmative constitutional obligation to provide the opportunity. You don't have to build it, but you have to utilize your zoning powers to allow it in some fashion, and you get to plan for it in some way. So without getting into the weeds and the numbers and how we got there, everything that we're looking at now is considered unmet need. And so let me walk you through what it is that we were looking at in terms of the areas and the changes that we want to recommend and how we think we're going to comply. Because there's a couple of mechanisms. Yancy, I can share my screen. There we go.
Right.
Okay, I'm gonna share it. First, I'm gonna show an overall map. Can you see that? Hopefully, no.
It just popped up.
Okay,
I
how's
want to
that?
expand your screen though. It's a little small.
How's that? It's as large as I can make it. But again, this will be available. We were, as I had said, we're looking at adjusting the third round overlays by removing the overlays near Tryon, the easterly side of Engle, from, I guess, no, down from Booth, down to Church. And these two areas, this area on Palisades Avenue. Now, in order to compensate for that, we have looked at the entire city. We determined, and I will show you via Google what we're talking about here. So we need to compensate. The first place we thought was a great opportunity was the area on West Street between Tallman Place and Demarest Avenue. And when you look at the conditions, this is just simply the aerial view. You can see there's an isolated bank, but a lot of pavement, cars. It's really underutilized property. And what we were thinking is that this area can become an excellent area for multifamily inclusionary zoning right across from Depot Square Park. It would clean up this area. And more importantly, it's close to the downtown. We want to keep housing where there are services and near the downtown where people can take advantage of the benefits of living near a thriving central business district.
And John, if I interrupt, it's also where the light rail would objectively go if it happens in the next quarter century. In other words, it's walking distance for families and people working in the city and so forth.
And you can see here's Palisades Avenue. Thank you, Mayor. It's an excellent point. The only drawback is we recognize that this is in the floodplain, but what we're thinking is that this is going to develop one way or another. It's going to develop because you can build in the floodplain, you can't build in the floodway. And what happens is DEP makes you construct it so that you are 3 feet above the base flood elevation, and you have to put in certain improvements to help with the water. The New Jersey Stormwater Management Act requires very strict measures to handle runoff to the point where you have to reduce the runoff coming off the property that exists today. So again,
Excuse me, John, did you just say that we can build in a flood area?
You can get a permit. You can elevate the structures. You can get, and it's done all the time. Because of its proximity to the downtown and the existing development of this property, it is a candidate because you can construct with appropriate engineering measures a project in here. The next site we looked at was on West Englewood Avenue. Starting from 215 going east to Cottage Place. Now, when you look at this area, you can see that it's very, very underutilized. You can see boarded up, fenced property. If we head east, you can see pavement, cracked pavement, parking in the front. This is the former Salvation Army store. You can see that it's fenced. It's in decrepit condition, and it's abandoned, essentially. Looking at all those factors together, you can see that this is in need of some input, some investment. There's already multifamily here, so we thought that this would be an unobtrusive way of satisfying a portion of our unmet need. And that's why we looked at this and we thought this was a great candidate. And then finally, we looked at Grand Avenue. Grand Avenue is characterized the entire length as mixed use. You have commercial areas, you have multifamily buildings, you have retail, you have car dealerships, you have a bunch of different kinds of uses. But we were looking at the stretch of Grand Avenue that encompasses 2 car dealerships from Van Nostrand Avenue to Honeck Street, except for this corner. Because this orientation is this way, we felt that this was a sufficient area to accommodate another overlay area. And when you take a look at this area, you can see when you go down, this is the Chevrolet dealership. What you got here is not a lot of street activity because it's a dealership. So what you have is a lot of pavement, a lot of cars, nothing else going on. So we thought, you know what, this might be a good candidate for an overlay because we can then use that as a way of revitalizing the street and at the same time accommodate our obligation as an unmet need. Now, let me explain for a moment what unmet need, what overlay means. These existing property owners are not affected because the current zoning will remain. They can go on their business without any interference from anyone. At some point, should they decide, you know what, the business isn't going well, we're going to leave, there's an overlay that allows for an opportunity to build multifamily housing. And the reason for that is that there may be an attraction for its location. We were thinking this would be an excellent candidate for mixed use where we'd have storefronts with apartments above. And what that does is it brings people into the area, it makes it walkable, and they have access to services because there's many different kinds of businesses in the area, and that this would be an excellent location for that. Those would be the 3 areas that we would substitute for the overlays that we want to eliminate or amend. Those are the physical components of what it is that we're representing. Now, it's an interesting concept because what we're saying is, and I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment so I can see everybody. Now, what are the benefits to doing this? Well, we get to amend the 3rd round to address issues that the city had with those areas. We get to compensate those overlays with areas that would actually benefit the city through revitalization, through investment, bringing people into the areas and breathing some life into the street. We're concentrating our attention mostly where there's the least intrusion into residential areas. And the approach here is that we can take care of the 3rd round and compensate in this direction. But where does that leave us with the 4th round obligation? It is our opinion that the city has zoned enough overlay areas to address to accommodate and address its 4th round. And we're going to make one correction to expand our ability to capture affordable housing. Right now, the city adopted a mandatory set-aside ordinance. Originally, it required 20% set aside for ownership properties and 15% if it was a rental. What that means is that you have to reserve 20% or 15% of your inclusionary development, your multifamily, as affordable to low moderate income families. The city, through its settlement agreement in the 3rd round with Fair Share Housing, changed that to require 20% on certain properties, but not all. And the application of the mandatory set-aside is limited to places that are subject to a use variance, an increase in density, zoning change, or a redevelopment plan. But that limits where you can apply the mandatory set-aside. So if somebody were to develop a housing development outside those categories, they don't have an obligation necessarily to provide for affordable housing, and you miss that opportunity to capture those units. Now, what's interesting is that you do allow residential development already in your neighborhood center zones and in your downtown. You already do that. So it's conceivable that someone could build in your neighborhood center location, for example, and not have an obligation to provide for affordable housing. And that, I think, is a missed opportunity. So what our plan is going to say is that we're going to implement new overlay zones, those three that we discussed and we showed you. And we're going to require that any development of 5 units or more will have to provide for affordable housing. And what that does is it expands the opportunity, and that's our argument. We have done enough. We don't need to rezone anymore. Our RDP, our ability to absorb new development is zero. As Mr. Buzek has said, the 25% that you have to reserve through redevelopment of existing commercial development is zero. And so it's the least intrusive way that I think we can comply with the fourth round, and be able to secure that necessary certificate of compliance that would then protect the city from builder remedy suits, which is why we're doing this in the first place. We are participating in the program because we don't want to leave our zoning open to challenge such that anybody can come in and do whatever they want anywhere on a builder's remedy. And we don't want that. That's why we're here. So the fourth round, that kind of encapsulates where we're going. And I think that would be sufficient. That would be the plan I would recommend we submit to the program. Now, what happens? We submit it to the program. Developers, property owners, anyone can submit a challenge up to August 31st after we file at the end of June or whenever we file. So there's no guarantee that, there won't be changes or, because we're going to be working through the courts and we can't anticipate what will happen or what lawsuits may arise, if any. It may be that our plan is strong enough and secure enough that, why bother? We're not going to litigate. But in any event, it's a defensible plan. And we would fight for this and see how it goes through the system. But I don't want to make it seem like, it's a panacea. It may not be, but that's always the risk. And you have that risk no matter what you do in government, right? You could be sued for anything. But in any event, this is a plan that I think is compliant and would satisfy the city's obligation going forward.
Okay, thank you. What I want to do now is take questions and comments from the council and the planning board. And I can see everybody on my screen. So if you have I'd ask that everybody who wants to speak speaks once, and then after everyone's had a turn, I can go back a second time. So raise your hand, and I see the mayor has his hand up. Mayor Wilds.
So to you, Ed, and to you, John, fabulous work, really, and thank you for your diligence. We engaged with litigation on this, and frankly, my politic on this is that this is pretty lousy with the kind of legacy we have on affordable housing to have us go through, all these artificial experiences, because more than most communities, particularly in this state and in this county, we set the standard of affordable housing, mayors before me and so forth. One thing you should know about the three overlays that you're thinking, the Grand Avenue near Honig is a very dangerous corner where I, as an EMT, have responded to countless flips of vehicles and everything. The city is always challenged dealing with that corner. That corridor has to do off Van Nostrand and Grand Avenue, just one block where this area would start from. And you would have to generate some kind of transportation slow down or accommodation if a major project is facilitated in that corner. So in other words, if we didn't have a history of consistent accidents in that corner in the city, unfortunately, their hands have been tied and the county does very little to assist it. We may be inviting a lot more residents and potential accidents. So it is something that may not be objectionable, but may be an entanglement. On the other two, it's less objectionable. I think the Salvation Army property in that area, I think there is a lot to improve. Although there is a historic funeral home in that corner that I just don't want to.
Just interrupt that. We didn't include that, Mayor.
I know.
Okay.
This may have a market effect either on their business or the contours of that community, and we want to be super sensitive to the value with the Nesbitt Funeral Home has to that part of the city. The Grand Avenue, we did the West Street, I think is super. The fact that it's in a floodplain could only improve things if any developer wants to get there and would have to absorb it under all the new DEP requirements. And that area by the Sugar Hill Gang, by West Street, by 111 West Street, the affordable housing, it's conducive to multi-family, and I think it was a very smart selection to do that simply because it's on the cusp of where light rail or some kind of commuting would go to the city and so forth. What I'm concerned about is that it takes these 3 overlays plus the requirement of 5, anybody who's developing more than 5 units. Presumably, if we didn't require that 5-unit requirement, you'd have to develop a heck of a lot more overlays. And you would be hard pressed to get communities to agree to it, and for the politics of this to kind of exacerbate the process. So my question is, number one, where did you come up with 5 units? In other words, I'm always being approached by properties that are being put on the block and somebody wants to buy it, and then they want to sit down at City Hall and see what our impressions are if it goes to one of the boards, and would there be an interest by the governing body that I sit on to help give them a payment in lieu of taxes, a pilot, and so forth. But where did you come up with the number 5? In other words, that's my hallmark question to you, tucked into the notion that if we didn't do this, we would then have to do 5 more overlays.
Well, it's an excellent question. It's a matter of density, Mayor. It comes out of the statute because there's a presumptive density of 6 units an acre. And then you have to back it out, and it comes out to that 5, but it comes from the statute. That's the trigger. So that's the magic number that we use, because that's what we've been using since the beginning with COA.
So if you take all, you're talking now, anybody who's going to develop 5 units or more in just the central business district or entire city?
No. Let's say somebody wanted to build in a commercial center zone, neighborhood center zone, which is not, it's in certain areas located near neighborhoods so that they could serve that. The NC zone already permits residential. The idea is that right now there's no obligation. So why would they be exempt while we have these other properties that do have that requirement? But
right.
The other thing is you don't want to have the missed opportunity because you need these units. Now, because it's unmet need, we're not going to zone for the entirety of everything that the city's obligated to under the 3rd and 4th rounds. But this is a way to capture it, and it's acceptable because it's unmet need.
Right. No, so it's aspirational. You're creating opportunities, but just to qualify this is only in the commercial parts of the city. If you build 5 units or more in the commercial spots.
Well, but we're not going to do away with the other. We're not going to do away with the other portions of the mandatory set-aside ordinance. If somebody gets a use variance, let's say outside the commercial areas, let's say the Board of Adjustment, they make a case and the city agrees, this is a good place, they would still have that obligation because of the mandatory set-aside ordinance that we agreed to with fair share. So if you're outside, you have to but the burden there is you have to satisfy the statutory burden to get a use variance, and it's not easy.
I understand that, and I'm glad that we have the boards who thoughtfully go through this. If we didn't do this 5-unit requirement, and again, just clarify, the 5-unit is in any commercial space in the city only. It's only for commercial.
No, it's for any residential development of 5 units or more that occurs in any area of the city. What I'm suggesting is that you already have zones in the downtown, in your commercial NC zone that permits residential, but there's no provision to capture any affordables. You already have it.
Got it. So you're recapturing that. If we didn't do that.
And then the argument there, Mayor, to fair share is that's expanded our ability. That's created a new opportunity. We're done.
Good. What if we didn't do that? How many more overlays would you have to put into play?
It would be difficult to tell because that's we're so limited in where we could put them. There's a couple of things that could happen. We could argue that we're done. We're not going to do any overlays, which is, I don't think, going to hold up.
Right,
through
well,
the program.
you have to hit 331.
No, you're
those-
not going to hit that, and you don't have to, but the bottom line is we're going to have to do something. The other thing that may happen is that Fair Share, some challenger of the program can come back and say, you know what? Increase the densities of the overlays you have today. That's another possibility, and we don't want to do that either.
No.
You know, that could happen. There's a number of consequences. So we wanted to come up with the strongest plan by offering alternatives to what we provoke, but that, to those kind of remedies.
Thank you, sir.
Councilwoman David?
Hi, thank you for the great presentation. I was not there to vote on the overlay zone. And my constituents said that they don't want nothing built. And I spoke to you, Lisa. The third ward be overburdened. We had floods and everything, and the fourth ward as well. So why is everything being pushed in the third and fourth ward when we do lack transportation downtown or even to the medical services when we don't even have that implemented? And also, we do have places on Palisade Avenue that on top of these stores that can use renovations and stuff like that to get the rent that they want, because those homes right there, from my understanding, when I spoke to some of the owners of these buildings, they said that they would love to have get a grant to refurbish their buildings and also be part of the solution. You know, it's right downtown. So I don't even know, do we approach them downtown on
Yes.
Palisade Avenue to ask, or even look and seek out grants that they can turn around and get their apartments renovated, the owners, you know, because that'd be great downtown. Grand Avenue, I think, is great to put it there. I mean, third and fourth ward, I don't want everything shoved in the third and fourth ward, me personally. I think the first ward and the second ward should also take some burden as well. You know, it's a lot of missing pieces here. And I get it. You want to build stilts and on top of water, and you know, hey, you know, this is what it is what it is, and I get it. But I don't get it, and I don't like it. So my job is to protect not only the third ward, but the integrity of all of Inglewood. But it has to be a better solution, and I think Grand Street is one of the solutions as well. And the first and second ward also need to take some of this heat as well. And thank you.
When we looked at the city, we looked at land uses, and we looked at those areas that we thought were the most appropriate that would benefit the city in redevelopment and to revitalize certain areas. Grand West, you saw Englewood Avenue, they were very carefully selected. That's all we're going to do. The idea of renovating and building on top of the stores down the Palisades, your zoning already allows that. You are allowed under your zoning to build second levels, second story building. But what would happen without the amendment to the mandatory set-aside ordinance is there would be no affordable units that would be required. And that would be a lost opportunity to capture those units and make the opportunity to have those buildings maybe expanded. In terms of grants, that's part of one of the biggest problems, is that the state has very limited funding for that kind of development. The most times developers and nonprofits go to the Home Mortgage Finance Agency for special financing to make affordable housing happen. And I've been involved in a couple of those applications.
Okay. John, also those applications, I mean, I hear you, but I think that as the city of Inglewood, we can give them an incentive also to be part of the overlay zone, and maybe a tax credit, because we gave it to like the Brownstones, and we gave it to other developers that came into Inglewood. So I'm thinking, that is there something that we can do as a city to give these properties that's on Palisade Avenue to be involved with this overlay zone or something? I'm just asking.
Yeah, well, Councilwoman, there's a great mechanism to do that. It's not part of this process, but there's something called the local redevelopment housing law, which allows the cities or communities to designate areas according to very strict criteria as redevelopment areas. And that process, Councilwoman, starts at the council. The council has to authorize an investigation on the part of the planning board. Planning board investigates an area against the criteria of the local redevelopment housing law. If an area qualifies, they make that recommendation to the council. The council then can either endorse that recommendation or reject it. If they endorse it, it gets designated as a redevelopment area. Then what does that do? You create a plan, it's called a redevelopment plan, and that empowers the city to be able to do what you just described. It empowers you to be able to take out bonds to redevelop. It empowers you to give pilots, which is your payment in lieu of taxes agreements. It gives you certain tools that you can use to do exactly what you're talking about. And that's a process that can happen at any time. Right now, we're focused on trying to get compliance with the fourth round because we have these deadlines that we have to live with that have been imposed, by the way, by the state legislature. But the process of redevelopment and identifying redevelopment areas to benefit from the extra tools that the LRHL gives you is something that's ongoing. And if you felt that there was an opportunity somewhere, you certainly can talk to the council. And if the council decides, let's investigate it, the planning board can investigate it on a very specific basis and then make a recommendation. The resolution you adopt to do that has to be very specific as to the properties that you're identifying. And the other thing it has to do is it has to identify whether it's condemnation or non-condemnation, because one of the powers that the local housing and redevelopment law gives you is condemnation. Now, I can tell you most towns don't go that route, because you more often than not will get tied up in litigation, which defeats the purpose of the whole process. But it's an option. I think in this case, you would want to do non-condemnation and to try to work with a developer if you could to come up with a vision and a plan and a development that would satisfy what you're concerned about and would revitalize a particular area. For example, West Englewood Avenue that I showed you that we're considering as an overlay, I think is a candidate as a qualifying redevelopment area, which can be done at any time. But right now we need to designate it as a affordable housing site. But if you wanted to revitalize it and you wanted to have the city, incentivize it, that's an option. Now, the downside of that is, pilots are tax abatements and you have to cost it out. You don't want to get burned with a bad agreement. You want to have it carefully analyzed by your financial experts, your business administrator, who's very capable of analyzing these things to make it sure that you're benefiting from the agreement.
Council President, can I just clarify one thing? It's Bill.
Yes, Mr. Bailey, go ahead.
Just to follow up with John and Councilwoman David were talking about, I just want to make a distinction between what a tax credit is,
right,
and what a payment in lieu of taxes is. Tax credits are under the auspices of the state of New Jersey and the federal government. A municipality doesn't have the ability to grant tax credits. So the New Jersey Housing Mortgage and Finance Agency, for example, on affordable housing projects, often the developer will make an application to them seeking, say, 4% tax credits to help offset, the lack of money they may make as opposed to building market rate units. So I just wanted to point that out, that they're not the same thing. Again, tax credits are the federal government and the state of New Jersey. A municipality can't do that.
Mr. Bill Belly, thank you for saying that. As you know, that I'm certified also as property manager in real estate as well. But I brought this to council's attention several months ago that we should also do something to revisit the people that own the buildings on Palisade Avenue, since it's close to transportation and everything. And that was my only gripe. You understand? That's it.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Done.
Councilman Tokayer.
Hi, thank you. John, can you help me just understand one thing? And I apologize if I don't understand something. So we have to build
Don't apologize. We're still trying to figure out this wacky law, but go ahead.
We have to build 359.
No,
357.
No, it's unmet need. You create an opportunity, but you don't have to meet the entirety of it. That's the beauty of being unmet need. That's the beauty of being an RDP of 0.
Okay. I mean, that's basically it. That was my question.
Yeah, and I think by amending the mandatory set-aside ordinance to expand the opportunity to capture units that you would have lost otherwise is a compelling argument.
So essentially, we just have to make a plan for the potential of an X amount of numbers, but we don't actually have to build it.
Well, that's the very definition of aspiration. You create the opportunity. The city does not have to be in the housing business. You don't have to build these units. You just have to zone an opportunity for it. The overlays keep the underlying zone. No one's affected unless somebody comes along and says, you know, I got a better idea, and then people agree, and then it moves forward that way. But it doesn't affect anybody underneath that zone. It just provides the opportunity. And what I'm suggesting, and what I suggested to the subcommittee was, if we capture units that would otherwise have been lost, then we would get credits for those that you would otherwise not have.
Right.
So, you know, that's the benefit, and we don't have to rezone anything other than the 3 overlays we're talking about, which would, you know, we know what we went through in the 3rd round, and we've done enough, I think.
So if no one buys a property and builds affordable housing in those overlay zones for the next 10 years, we're not subject to any.
Well, it's a little more complicated. I didn't want to necessarily get in the weeds, but there are reporting requirements and lookbacks. You know, and at some point, you could face an issue where the fair share, someone can say, you know what, they're not working, come up with a better plan. But that's
Okay.
You know, I haven't been involved in any of those yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Ed, have you, Mr. Buzak?
No, but your answer is correct. There's a 5-year mid-year review to assess or evaluate the success of whatever you did in round 4 and make adjustments if that's necessary. The challenge here with Englewood and with any municipality that has a realistic development potential of 0 and has no vacant land is, as John pointed out, limitations on your ability to satisfy anything. So, it's not like you can pick and choose and you have all this land available, even developed. You look at it and you're making right now intelligent assessments of areas that you believe are likely to redevelop. The fact that they don't redevelop could be a matter of, and many times is a matter of financing, a matter of market conditions, other market conditions, prices, a whole series of things that the municipality has absolutely no control over. So it's not that you picked a bad site. It's just that the economy at that point in time, or at this point in time, is not conducive to actually accomplishing what those overlay zones are supposed to accomplish. So there's a lot of factors that go into the mix. And even if none of these sites develop by the mid-year review, which will be in 2030, we'd have to evaluate where we are and see whether it's the sites that's the problem or it's other things that are completely beyond our control. So rezoning or overlay zoning other sites would have no effect whatsoever, because it's not the site, it's other factors.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Rosenzweig.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. And again, I'd like to join in thanking Ed and John on their hard work on this and the excellence of the presentation. And I know you're working with many municipalities across the state, but I feel like we're your only client. That's how much attention you've given to Englewood, even though I know you're being pulled in dozens of different directions because every municipality is going through the same timeline. But I've never gotten that sense that you've given anything but your full attention to the city of Englewood. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And we know we're your favorite city. So yeah. So I'm just going to assume that. So, I was on the council when we did the overlay zone for the 3rd round. And John, if I remember correctly, I think the percentage of it in the 1st ward was 61% at that time.
I'd have to look, Councilman. I don't recall.
But I think
that sounds
because
about right. That sounds about right.
Yeah, Actually, the first ward had more than the other three wards combined, which actually I got some pushback on from people in the first ward. But the real feeling there was that, the public transportation is running along, along the streets. The bus routes are in the first ward, and we wanted to put the overlay zones in areas where any new residential that came in would have access to public transportation. And then you have a big property like the Field Club is in the first ward. And actually, I personally wasn't noticed. I think I missed, because I think I'm about 350 feet from the Field Club. But, it's in my, I don't want to sound like Sarah Palin here, but I can see it from my backyard. And so I think a lot of people in the first ward are bearing the brunt of the overlay zone, though as we were talking, there hasn't been any development as of yet, but certainly something people think about. So it's really been mostly a first ward issue, the third round overlay. We'll see with some of these, if these switching of properties works out. The percentage will probably change a little bit, but it'll probably still be, the area, obviously by 111 West is also first ward. So probably still be a majority in the first ward that way. Again, which is, I'm not happy about, but probably appropriate because of our access to public transportation. With regard to the set-asides, which, I put, as Council President in 2022, that was the first ordinance we passed that year, and then it was subsequently modified. What do other so one thing I think is clear, we don't want to put ourselves at a disadvantage to have people come in and invest in the town. What are some of the set-asides in other towns? Are we in the same ballpark as them, the 20%? Or are we just, standard deviations away from what other municipalities in Bergen County are doing?
The standard was 15% for rental, 20. All the towns are going to 20.
Okay.
I have a couple of towns that have 25%. And the justification for that is that there's some communities that think that there's a windfall going towards the market rate units. But more importantly, when they amended the law, they took away our rental credits. So any family rental, we don't get any credit for. We have to find other mechanisms, other kinds of housing types to capture credits that can offset some of that density. So it's uniform. It's almost getting to be uniform 20. And I see that popping up. In fact, Fair Share insisted on 20 and in the third round. And they put that in all their agreements that I'm familiar with. So
thank you. That's very
right with the other municipalities.
That's very edifying to me. So it's not as if someone who wants to invest in a municipality and really upgrade some of the neighborhoods is going to look at Englewood and say, well, this is just not a town we can work with. It's because if they go one town over, one town north, one town south, 20 miles south, this is just the playing field now. And I think developers are going to have to adjust to it. And this is just the new rules of the game. It's not the 80s anymore. It's a different time. All right. Thank you very much. Again, I really appreciate all the work you've done on behalf of the city.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilman Wilson.
Yes, greetings. Thank you. I have a couple questions, and maybe John or Ed could explain. You guys are aware that there are other municipalities that have been exempt. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And could you explain to the people in the audience, and just for the record, why, in fact, Englewood is not exempt?
You want to take that, Bill?
Well, I'll start, and John can supplement. The municipalities, Councilman, that you're referring to are qualified urban aid municipalities. There's about 50 or so in the state. The statute sets forth a variety of objective criteria that you have to meet based upon income, activity, a variety of demographic information. And if you meet that, it's not a subjective determination, it's an objective determination. If you meet the criteria that's set forth in the statute, you become a qualified urban aid municipality. And if you look at the list of qualified urban aid municipalities, some of them will surprise you, and you wonder why or how Englewood did not qualify. For example, Montclair is a qualified urban aid municipality, and yet there was an article in the paper the other day that their housing prices are unachievable by any low and moderate income household. And there was a cry in the municipality to do something to create affordable housing, despite the fact that they don't have the obligation. So it's not just more urbanized, less affluent municipalities. And I can't go through. I mean, I could pull out the statute and tell you what the criteria are, but my point is, it's objective. Sometimes when you look at who's who and who's in there, you sort of roll your eyes, but that they do qualify. Englewood does not. Now, I didn't do the analysis myself, but the DCA did it as it's an objective analysis. So we have to. I'm confident that they calculated it correctly, despite the fact that you may subjectively look at it and say, I don't get it.
I'm
John,
not confident.
Just to add to that, if I may, just for a moment, you don't get to take the exemption unless you are statutorily designated by the legislature. So that disqualifies Englewood, because I'm looking at the list and you're not. When Ed says you'd be surprised, Hoboken's on that list. My daughter can't afford to live in Hoboken. She lives there, but she had to share an apartment with 3 other girls. And now she's moved out and she's paying an astronomical rent. But, that's, like Ed said, it's set up by legislature and with objective criteria that the state establishes. And that's where that stands.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ed, for your explanation as well. And you said you're confident in regards to the numbers. It's been proven to me how we've challenged the numbers from 381 and we got to 351 and 331. But what you guys did not address this evening, unless I missed it, was our present need and our unmet need. And I think it's at 166.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Correct. Yes. The way we address that, and it's the least controversial part of the plan. When we were doing the third round, your obligation for present need was well into the 300s. Now it's 166. And by the way, present need isn't cumulative. It's by period. The city established a rehab program under the third round that would continue. That rehabilitation program has a manual. It's managed by the administrative agent. The manual tells the public how to apply, what qualifies, what they need to do, and there's a process. How do you fund it? Through your Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so that this money is collected as a collection of money from building permits, goes into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and it gets used as rehabilitation monies, grants for low and moderate income qualified families. So that program is in place and it will continue, and that's what the plan will state. And that's a good program because that helps your people that are already in the community that could use it.
Excuse me? Who? It helps who?
It's a good program for you, for the community, because it helps your constituents. It helps the people of Englewood improve their properties and eliminate code violations. That's what that's for.
Oh, okay. So the 166 is our present need. And that number represents affordable to moderate to low income. Is that correct?
No, the present need is determined on census data that identifies substandard indicators of substandard housing. So
Okay,
you
so
can
what
do
does
the
one
census.
66 represent that
It
Inglewood has to
represents
provide?
homes that, yeah, it represents homes that HUD has identified that as substandard, and they use a criteria of crowding, 1.01 per bedroom, per room, the lack of facilities like bathrooms and kitchens. So they look at those criteria based on census data and they formulate the number. And it comes out of the CHAS, which is the HUD book on that kind of a study that it stems from the census data. That's how
Okay,
that's determined.
thank you for that. So what I'm trying to get to is that 166 are 20% set aside?
No, that's a separate category of obligation.
Okay, so where does the 20% come in for set aside? At what particular number?
New development, any new development that would be in the overlay that would be for multifamily development. And if we go forward with the amendment to the mandatory set aside ordinance, any development that includes 5 units or more would have to provide a set aside.
I got that. So what is our current number now? 351?
The number that we had settled at was 351.
Okay.
That's the obligation. Prospective need.
Yeah, I think it's 359, if I'm not
Oh, I'm sorry.
mistaken.
Yes, 359. Yeah. I was looking at my old number of 331. 359.
Okay. So just so that we're all clear, out of the 359 for Inglewood's number presently, how many of those are set aside or for affordable housing?
No.
Out of the 359.
That prospective need is satisfied through inclusionary development, which is it comes out of, it's called the builder's remedy, where you get 80-20. I'll give you an example. I'm a builder. I have a multifamily project. I have 100 units. 20% of those 100 or 20 units have to be set aside as affordable units. 80 units are going to be market. So the 359 is satisfied through the density. But because it's unmet need, we're not going to focus on zoning that's going to force that kind of development. We're going to leave it where it is as overlays and let it grow on its own in areas that we're now adjusting to better places.
And here's the part I want to clarify, and not necessarily me. I would like you guys to clarify it so our residents are clear on how we're moving forward. If in fact that certain individuals have calculated the 166 to low to moderate income, the number that would have to be met for new residency would be 830. And so therein lies where the hysteria is. If we need 166 for low to moderate income and that to be the 20% or the set aside, the amount of buildings that we would need would be 830. And so that's the scary part in regards to our residents believing that they're losing their homes, that they'll be forced out, especially the age-friendly residents. It's a very scary calculation for them. And so once and for all, while we're all here, the planning and the council, I would like for you guys to clear up a clear number for affordable housing.
Let me start, Councilman, and then John can jump in here. You mentioned two numbers, and those are the numbers we mentioned tonight. The 166.
You didn't mention the 166 tonight.
Because we were focusing on the
You didn't mention 166 tonight.
No, you mentioned 166 during the course of this discussion. Yes, that's
Yes,
correct.
sir.
The second number was the 359.
Yes, sir.
And that is the number that the city settled on as being what our prospective need is.
That is correct.
However, that number, despite the fact that it's 359, is not the number we actually have to satisfy. The number we have to satisfy is the realistic development potential. Because if you remember, I said and John said that we don't have sufficient developable and vacant land in the city to accommodate 359 units. We just can't do that, despite the fact that that was the quote allocation. What we technically have to satisfy, legally have to satisfy, is zero. That's the realistic development potential that John came up with, saying it's a great number, 359, but we can't satisfy it. We can satisfy none of it because we don't have sufficient land. And we have a right to say that now. And we have a right to come up with a plan that demonstrates that we can't satisfy one of those units. And that's what we're doing. We're saying our realistic development potential is 0. However, we then have to think about, okay, you can't satisfy your realistic development potential because it's 0. There's nothing that you can do. What can you do? What if you can't rezone property because you don't have property to rezone that's vacant, what can you do? And that's where you get to what John is suggesting, the overlay zones, or a few overlay zones, in which you can say, look, we will put overlay zones on property that's already developed. And in the event that a property owner in those overlay zones wants to develop in accordance with that overlay zone, they have a right to do that. So that's why John calls it aspirational. The underlying zoning stays in effect, and they have an opportunity to do it. But as I think John pointed out, and if he didn't, I'll point it out, we had 15 overlay zones in round 3, and I believe that there was not a single property that took advantage of the overlay zoning to create any affordable housing. And that's the aspirational part of it. So that's it. We have a legal obligation to produce 0 number of affordable units in round 4. And all we're doing now is figuring where can property potentially redevelop.
Now, I'd like to jump in just for a moment, Councilman Wilson, and clarify something. That 166 number,
Yes, sir.
These are the homes occupied by your residents that qualify by income for grants through the rehab program to fix the homes. They're already here. So if I'm an elderly person and I qualify either under the low or moderate income standard, I can apply. They will fix, and we can fix major systems, roofs, heating, all of those things, windows, things that are we want to bring houses code compliant. We're not creating new units. We're fixing units that are already existing in your home. That's the 166. That's what's called present need.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And can you explain to us, as we're recreating and moving the lines of the overlay zone, why Booth Avenue and Church was removed from the overlay zone?
Because of the proximity to the single family zones, we wanted to try to draw those away because we had better areas that we thought would capture the affordable housing. The idea was to comply with the recommendations of the master plan that was recently adopted, which is to kind of put the units in the downtown. By modifying the mandatory set-aside ordinance, we would be doing that because you would be losing those units if they were constructed.
Yeah, but as that's not a consistent formula, it appears, because the formula where we have the Buick and the Chevy on Grand Avenue, that's not in the downtown area either, even though it's somewhat of a business district. It appears that, excuse me?
No, it was an area that would benefit from some redevelopment with mixed use to take care of that land use and create something that was better for the streetscape and for the community to revitalize that corner, because that dealership's not doing much for the city other than, selling cars. That's why, when an opportunity presents itself from a planning perspective, we identify it.
I'm not against that. I'm just stating how we are creating and moving lines for the overlay zone. And I wanted to be clear on the record on why we're doing so and why certain properties and areas and wards were removed from the overlay zone. And I want to state it for the record. I'm not against certain things, but and as we articulate why we're doing stuff on Lafayette, you mentioned part of it from crack pavement. You might want to leave that out of your next presentation, because we have crack pavement all over, and that is should no way be a criteria for including places into the overlay zone.
that was just one aspect of that street.
I understand.
When
I
we
had
look
to
at it,
share.
we
I
look
had
at
to share that.
everything. We look at everything in the context of what the neighborhood looks like, not just one. I was just pointing out various things bordered, that.
Okay,
But
I get it. I get it. But that had no bearings on why we're moving the lines for overlay. And so and thank you for your explanation. I appreciate that. And so as we move forward, we are expecting to increase the housing in the downtown area. Is that right?
we certainly will create the opportunity to do that by modifying the mandatory set-aside ordinance. Your ordinance already permits residential in your downtown, but we would not be able to generate any affordable housing units from that.
Okay. And my last question for right now, and thank you guys for bearing with me. You mentioned that we could build in flood zone, and previously we had discussions about large development in Inglewood South, but we were prohibited for that modification because of the flood zone. So it appears to be a little convoluted why we're saying that we can build on.
I didn't want to get in the weeds with DEP regulations. There are various levels of regulations. You cannot build in the floodway, for example, and you cannot build in a riparian buffer. There's certain criteria. If you're outside of that buffer, outside of a floodway, then you can get a permit, and then you go through a very rigorous review. And then there's certain engineering solutions you have to bring to your project to get the permit. So it's you have to understand the distinctions in the regulations between floodway, riparian buffers, wetland buffers, and then floodplain. So it's a little more complicated.
Okay, and the only reason why I brought that up is because you mentioned West Street, which is obviously maybe the technical term I'm using is improper, and forgive me for that, but the West Street is a flood area. So, and then when you said that we couldn't do South Inglewood, they seem to coincide with me. So,
well, yeah, the West Street is not a wetland. It's not in a riparian buffer. It's not near a class 1 stream. There are certain things. So it is conceivable that you can get a permit. And I anticipate at some point, somebody's going to develop there because you have those lots there and they're just begging to be built on at some point. So and it's going to be the burden of meeting the regulations is going to be on the developer, not the city. They're going to have to go through the engineering and the permitting process. But it's floodplain. It's not floodway, it's not wetlands, it's not all the things that you can't build and you have to stay away from. Now,
so
we try
lastly,
to avoid those areas, but here we're in the downtown and there's going to be development there. We might as well dictate and manage what's going to happen there. And by the way, I'll finish. These developments, when they build, they actually improve the infrastructure because they have to reduce runoff. They have to put in modernized stormwater management. I know that your fine city engineer, Mr. Volsi, requires dry wells for pools. I mean, we are very conscious of what needs to be done to control those kinds of impacts.
Okay, and thank you for that. And so as we move forward, because not only I have a concern, my constituents have a concern, and people that actually think that Inglewood South is a viable vehicle to build in. And so because of the stream and other regulations, maybe we can stipulate that so the laymen, our residents, and newcomers understand why there's factories in Inglewood South and we can't necessarily capture that area. So thank you.
Okay, Mr. Byrne, did you have your hand up before?
I did have my hand up, but I was listening to Councilman Wilson. I just want to raise two things. First, I want to thank the council and you, Council President, for setting up this joint meeting because from the planning board's perspective, last year we received the suggested overlay ordinance and we weren't prepared, and we didn't really like it, and we weren't part of the process. So this year we are, and I think it's a greatly improved collaborative effort, and this is the way it should be. So I thank you for that. I wanted to point out that, I really didn't track the committee that Ms. Cardone and Mr. David were on behalf of the planning board. But I just want to caution the group that the automobile sector is historically a very important component of the economic underpinning of the city of Englewood. And when you start fooling around with Grand Avenue and disincentivize perhaps investment into that sector, and it's within a very small area from Route 4. And people come to Englewood traditionally and historically to buy automobiles and get them serviced. So I just want to stand up for the commercial sector. It's an important economic underpinning. It's an important important to our tax base. So we're focused on providing new housing, fresh housing. We want young people to move in. We want affordable housing, all those great things that the committee is working on and that the council and the planning board are working on. But let's keep a perspective on those other sectors that are so important to the city of Englewood that many communities don't have. Many communities just rely on the residential tax base. Fortunately, we're diversified in that area. Our homeowners and our condo owners and townhouse owners don't bear the full brunt of the tax burden. We have a healthy commercial sector, and we have to keep our focus on that as well.
I need to dispel something here. Those businesses will continue, and if they continue to thrive, that's a good thing. No one's saying that, because the other alternative would be to actually physically zone it a multifamily zone, and then that would make it non-conforming. These uses will remain conforming. The problem becomes one of what is the future going to look like for automobiles, especially now. And what happens, I've seen a lot of dealerships. I'm working on a redevelopment plan for a dealership now that is out of business, vacant, falling apart. We have to anticipate, well, if that happens, what do we want to replace it with? Under the Mount Laurel Doctrine, we have an obligation to at least consider the possibility of housing. And what we're thinking of is, well, it's not going to be pure housing. Although we have apartments on Grand, we know that. We can make it a mixed use. We could create a neighborhood there, a vibrant, walkable neighborhood that would service the residents, but also provide some housing. That's the thinking. It's not to hurt businesses, because if we were doing that, we would just zone it out of business altogether. We're not doing that. We're not hurting anything underneath the zone.
Thank you, John. I do agree with that. And thank you for the explanation. I think we should make it a mixed use. Thank you so much for your expertise. Greatly appreciated.
Does anybody else from the planning board or council have any questions or comments at this time? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open this up to the public. Any member of the public who wishes to speak is asked to raise their hand and to be placed in queue to be called upon to speak. Speakers are requested to give their name, their address, and they have 3 minutes to speak. So if anybody from the public wishes to speak, please raise your hand now.
Just a reminder, it's at the bottom of your screen. There's a little raise hand icon.
Okay, I'm now going to close the public session. So we're back. I just wanted the next time that the planning board meets in early June. What's the date that you have noticed for your fair share housing plan?
It will be June 5th.
June 5th. So on the schedule on June 5th, the planning board is meeting to adopt the fair share housing plan. And then on June 17th, which is our last council meeting of the month, the council then passes a resolution accepting it. and that makes us compliant with the June 30th deadline. So before we finish the call tonight, we didn't hear from a lot of planning board members, so I just want to make sure that the planning board members are okay with this plan and that you're ready to go forward with the fair share housing plan as discussed tonight. And if there are any reservations, now's a good time to express it. So I'm going to just want to give one more opportunity. If anyone has any questions or comments, to please raise their hand. Okay, so
Lisa, are we meeting in executive session? Is the planning board meeting again before this other deadline?
We're meeting again on May 22nd, but that will be for unless we change the agenda for the amendment to the master plan.
Right, so we can go into executive session, Doug, if we want to, at that point, and have a conversation about this if we want to, right? When is the deadline, Lisa?
well, you have noticed for June, you're noticing June 5th is when you are scheduled to adopt the plan, because it then has to go to the council, and our last meeting is the 17th, and we need.
We can have a round, a roundabout executive session conversation before that, if we want to give some time to this. I would suggest that the planning board do that rather than putting everyone on the spot now to make an opinion or express their reservations. I think everybody would like to study all of this. Everything that you gave us, we have in attachments we received in the last few days, Paris, right?
Yes.
So let it sink in, let people read the materials, and then Doug, if you just run an executive session.
We can certainly raise questions, discuss it, and
I would also just remind you that we do have one more subcommittee meeting, and you, Mayor, are on the subcommittee, as is the planning board chair, David, as is Councilman Wilson, as is Mercedes Cordone. So we have 4 members of the planning board on the 5-person subcommittee, so that if there are any issues that were raised, Mr. Zabel, when is that subcommittee meeting?
The subcommittee meeting, you had handed out the session. I think it's the 21st. I could tell you.
So that's still after the other meeting, correct?
Yes, it's 21st.
Right. So that's
and that's if it's necessary. I mean, it depends on.
Right. So I would say that we have another subcommittee meeting for May 21st. I think that was put in to address any issues that may come up in the public session that we had, and in this meeting, to make sure we had a plan. But the planning board chair, Mr. David, will communicate and about the plan if there are any other concerns that we need to address.
Yes,
Okay, we'll have we're gonna go have a like the mayor said, an executive session, and we're gonna discuss it. I'm gonna give my members a chance to digest what they've heard tonight. And then we'll report back to you.
Okay, very good. So now I'm going to need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved. Motion. Yeah, so moved. Thank you.
I need someone to second it.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Nice job, John.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.